Now. Good morning to all. This is bike fitting webinar number 3. We have a panel. We're going to today talk about or a continuance of the tri-fitting. And then I'm going to turn it over to Michael, and we're going to get in a little bit more detail from last time into more of the business aspects of bike fitting, bike shops, etc. We're going to introduce the panel, then we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start with Happy. A little quick introduction.
Good afternoon. My name is Happy Friedman. Call me Happy. I've been bike fitting for a little over 40 years. If we go back to 1978, I've done road bikes, tri-bikes, mountain bikes, cross bikes, handicap bikes. I used to do fitting out of a hospital, so I've done a lot of clinical bike fitting. There's very little I haven't seen. Probably nothing we'll come up with along today's discussion. And I've got some funny opinions about tri-bikes, which I'm saving for later.
That'll be fun. That'll be fun. Craig, you're new to the panel.
My name is Craig Falk, owner and operator of Dynamic Bike Fit, Roanoke, Texas. I've been doing advanced fitting since 2009. I can't go back into the 80s when I worked in some bike shops. But again, that still falls into the old way of doing things. Hey, stand over the bike, lift it up. Hey, you're good. So I use a variety of different technologies and techniques and have blended some of the schools of thought to find what really works well for my clientele. In addition, I am a PhD candidate now in sport management at Texas A&M.
Oh, great. Michael Sylvester, you're up.
Hi, my name is Michael Sylvester. I own Bicycle Fitting Services in Portland, Oregon. I've been fitting since 1981. I helped Ben Serrata start the Serrata Fit program, so first teaching program in the United States, and then have been pushing on to Trek and did Trek's program for 3.5 years. So been a believer in fit for a long time. Interested in working with you today to find out more about what you guys think about the future of bike fit.
There we go. Good. And Tom.
Good morning. My name is Tom Weisman. I own Cycling Solutions in Akron, Ohio. I've been fitting in bike shops for a little more than 10 years and started on my own independent practice about 5 years ago. So I've been fitting independently full-time for 5 years. And much like Craig, I have a variety of methods and practices that I use, whatever is necessary at the time. It's a matter of application, and I look for best case scenarios, of course. So, you know, my business is slowing down through the winter, but I'm still fitting 3-4 days a week, as opposed to 7-8 days a week during the summer. It seems like 10 days, many weeks, but thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Tom. Paul. You're not coming through, Paul. Nope, not yet.
That mute button is his nemesis.
Yeah. Oh, we'll get Paul there. The other Paul. Nope, not yet. I'll go ahead and introduce myself while Paul's getting it sorted out. Bike fitness coaching. We do bike fitting as well as bike fit education. We've been doing bike fit education for probably the last 5 or 6 years. I put the course together with my daughter, who is a physical therapist. She's a physical therapist at Red Bull, works on all these high-end crazy people that do all these stunt works and stuff. We also do a lot of remote bike fitting. I've done over probably 500 Peloton fits. Common issues with doing Pelotons and riding, it's always knee pain, In my experience, looking at the Pelotons, it's a good machine as long as it is fit for you. Most of the people are 5'2", 5'3", and I'm convinced if you look at the way the Peloton is adjusted, there's no forward and back on the handlebars, it's only up and down. I'm convinced it was designed by and for a 6-foot male. So if you're not a 6-foot male, it's not going to fit you too well. So we've done a lot of that, done a lot of other remote fitting for people in areas that don't have bike shops or don't have bike fitters. And most of my students now in the bike fit classes are PTs. We're accredited by the APTA, American Physical Therapy Association, and the CPTA, California Physical Therapy Association. I can give CEUs to the PTs. In a nutshell, Paul, you're muted still. Unmute.
You hear me now?
Yep.
Can you hear me
Yes.
now?
There you
All
go.
right.
Go ahead.
Good. Sorry about that. Paul Williams here, Tampa Bay, Florida. I own Perfect Fit, Fix, and Ride. I've been bike fitting almost as long as Happy and Michael, but not quite, among other things. We are Bike Fit Studio First, best practice service center, and we're a retailer for all things cool and bikes. Just loving being a part of this. Thanks for having me on, and been looking forward to this all week.
All right, we'll go ahead and kick this off then. I'll probably start with Craig on this one. General fitting question. So maybe a few different parts to think about is how do you fit a triathlete versus a roadie? What are the differences? What do you look for? And how do you take into account, this came up last meeting, how do you take into account that what I see most, let's call them road fitters, they will fit a triathlete on a bike. And then once the triathlete races the bike, they slide forward about 4 or 5 inches when they're at racing speeds. How do you accommodate for those type of fit issues? Craig, take it away.
So I frequently, there's a few fitters around where I'm at that do a road fit for a tri bike. So they are pretty much just setting them up as if they were on a road bike and bending them at the hips. So the one thing that I try to do is get the rider more forward to open up the hip. I would say I'm probably more protective of the hip than anything else for a triathlete, just because of the lower back angle. The other thing I find on the tri-fit that a lot of people come in with is they're trying to be really, really, really low, and their hip range of motion is not there to support it, or their flexibility is not there to support it. So what I try to do is find that spot, and it usually goes against their visions of what aero position should be. So I tend to lean more towards protecting the hip to make it better for their run.
Good points. Happy, are you around?
Always.
Always.
I'm just
Okay,
having-
so your thoughts, you said you had some definite opinions on
I
tri-bike
do.
fitting.
I'm not sure most people who buy them need them to start off with, and that we should be spending that much money on selling them as opposed to renting them. The reason I say this is most triathletes do no more than 4 events in the course of a year.
Mhm.
So if you're only doing 4 events, and most tri-bikes are designed for the Ironman course, which is basically out and back in one turn, meaning the handling is crap. Most people don't know how to ride them, have no technique. If we put them on a road bike, we can get 300 days of training on a better fitting bike, therefore get better quality training, bring them up to speed, make them faster, make them better bike handlers, make them able to make left and right turns on courses that are more technical, like Lake Placid or like Tremblant, as opposed to Kona. So if you want to make them a faster rider, you need to make them a stronger, faster rider with better skills. And on a course like Lake Placid, I've seen people literally come to a stop to make a turn because it's on a downhill, it's gravelly, and it's got a drop off on the other side. So if you don't make the turn, you're into the woods.
Wow.
Personally, I'd rather be faster and in more control than struggling fighting my bike. And I feel that most tri bikes don't fit properly because the top tubes are too long. And particularly women's, the top tubes are too long. The wheels are too big. They should be riding on 650s as opposed to 700s so that they actually can move around on their bike. I also use as my criteria for fitting, I look at a spirometer and look at tidal flow and volume. So my goal is in fitting to improve their physiology on a bike and hopefully off the bike as well. So they come into the run with a lower chance of going anaerobic quickly than a higher chance. And most of the people I've seen who come off of most of the tri bikes they've purchased are on the edge of being anaerobic or have been on and off on the course on the bike before they got to the exchange area.
Okay, good. Yeah, good points. So let's start with Paul on this one. Happy kind of brings up a point. If you kind of listen to what it was said, what's the best approach when somebody wants to use aero bars on their road bike?
I'm with Craig on his idea of protecting the hip. And I went through, my perspective is all the way back from here's this Scott DH bar, put it on your bike, Paul, it's going to be fast. And then sort of took the journey with the rest of the industry to figure out how to make that work. So I prefer not to put an aero bar on a road bike. And with my clients, I talk to them about that and the reasons why. And there are safe ways to put an aero bar on a road bike, and we do that sometimes, and sometimes it's the right thing to do. But if we're going to put an aero bar on the road bike, I may end up putting a zero offset seat post on it so that I can move the seat forward. I'm probably going to try to put a more of a traditional tri-bike seat like an ISM or a Cobb, something that has got a bigger range of positioning opportunity with the saddle so that I can move the hips forward. And then at the end of the day, realizing I probably can't get the hips as far forward as I'd like or as I could on a tri-bike, I'm definitely going to keep the front end high. High is reasonable. And I don't know about the rest of you, but most of the people I'm fitting for triathlon, sprints and Olympics are something they do, but that's not really their A races. More often than not, people are wanting to do longer events anyway. And I'm always going to set people less aggressive for those kind of events. So definitely less aggressive. I think the tricky thing on the front end of a road bike with aero bars is keeping the reach reasonable. So the distance sort of from the hips to the elbows, that can be the tricky part, getting that part right and not overextended. So certain aero bars that we could clamp on there will work better for that than others. But you're probably going to need something with a pretty broad range of adjustability in my experience.
I'd like to jump in on what Paul was saying there.
Yep, go ahead.
I don't know if talking about a product, a specific product, is appropriate here. Is that okay here?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. One thing I found for those that just kind of like, I really want the aero bars on my road bike, and they're a triathlete, they don't want to spend, to Happy's point, the big bucks on a TT bike that may or may not work well for them in all scenarios. I actually, years ago, I thought it was a gimmick at first, but I have set up several riders with the red shifting seat post. And yes, it's not perfect. It's not where we would like to be, but it definitely helps in getting that hip to open up for aero bars on a road bike.
Okay,
Uh,
Michael had something there too. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, I just want to say, in regards to what Happy was saying, I agree with Happy, but this is America, and Americans are famous for having way more equipment and things that they want to buy. So you can't really stop someone from using something, even if it's not appropriate. So that's one point. The other point is, whether it's a tri bike or a road bike or whatever bike, our basic way that we screen people, if you're doing any kind of a screen where you're looking at hamstrings and back flexion, if it's a forward bend and you say reach towards the floor and their hands are 10 inches from the floor, you can put a pile of cash down there, $100 bills, and say, you can have anything you can pick up without bending your knees. Well, of course, they can't pick up anything. So, whether that's a road bike or a tri bike, you're assessing their body and what's happening in their body and where they need to be comfortable and powerful and strong. So to me, there's less emphasis on the bike and more emphasis on what is this person really trying to do? I mean, I think all of you might agree that biomechanically, if we put your body in better alignment, that it's going to function better. So, whether the person, you have to kind of walk that person along and explain what you're doing and why you're wanting to do it, but staying within the boundaries. So that's kind of how I look at the difference between road and tri. Yeah, there's aerodynamics there, but if your body can't be in that position for more than a few minutes, that's going to be not very comfortable over a Ironman triathlon.
So this for Tom, the kind of a part B on that question. It's come up that you never want to do it because you are now upsetting the balance or the design geometry of the road bike. It becomes inherently dangerous to ride. What's your thoughts on that? That's the argument against putting, the most common argument I hear about against putting aero bars on a road bike.
Well, to a certain extent, I would agree with that. I mean, if you change position enough on any bike, whether it be tri bike or road bike, or pick your application of bike, you change a person's position on it enough, and it can be very dangerous to ride if the person doesn't have the skills to be able to handle it. And that is really where the assessment comes in, is that if you have somebody that is planning on putting aero bars on a road bike, and their skill level isn't at a level necessary to be able to steer with their hands in that position, sometimes we have to talk through that whole change of the bike handling characteristics and how the bike is actually controllable. So I would say, is there a balance? Absolutely, there's a balance. And I would say, for sustainability reasons, the vast majority of road bikes that I'm putting tri bars on, they're not trying to achieve a tri bike position on that bike. They're simply riding at either a distance or a duration, intensity, frequency beyond what their nervous system is capable of supporting them effectively. So their hands can no longer handle it. Their legs and core are not handling it, not holding them up anymore in that road bike position. So they're looking to relieve hand pressure. And I think, Ironman distance or longer, even, race across the West, or, pick your ultra distance event where somebody's on the bike for days at a time, it's not sustainable for the wrist to be able to handle that type of pressure when the nervous system has long past failed. So you give them an out to be able to put weight in a different position, more so than aerodynamics or, the advantage of a aero position. you're looking more for relief than anything. So when I'm fitting somebody for aero bars on a road bike, regardless of what their discipline is, we're often talking about other things that can be done to help them get beyond what is necessary for them to need that crutch of a position, so to speak. Because often what I find is that when a road bike is set up sustainably, the aero position or aero bar position and the drop position are very similar as far as a spinal flexion position is concerned. So does it really make that big of a difference? If you're looking to relieve pressure on the hand, yes. If you're looking to get more aero or something like that, often that's just not the case.
Really? Okay. Well, we'll continue with Tom on this next one. Kind of another fitting question is that came up last time. How forward is too forward when it comes to knee forward of the foot for tri positions? Does it really matter? Why or why not?
Oh, that's a loaded question. So I would say the vast majority of fitters at this point are not concerned with where the knee is over pedal spindle. It's certainly a measurement that can be considered, and it's an easy reference point. But when it comes to tri-bike position, I mean, I've seen knees 6, 7, 8 centimeters out in front of, or in front of the pedal spindle, and if again, it depends. If a person isn't having issues being that far forward and they run well off the bike, and it's a sustainable position and their hip is open, more power to you. I don't have any problem with that. But often when we get that far forward, a whole bunch of other things cascade as a result. Your bike handling skills have to be darn good to be able to have that much weight out over the front end of that bike and be able to keep that bike in front of you. If the event requires a lot of turning, being that far forward is probably not the best course of action as far as a fit is concerned. So I would say there's other factors to play into that, not just how far forward is too far forward. It's so dependent on the application of what they're riding, how they're riding, what the skill level of the rider is, what demands they're being put under. There's too many factors to take into account for a definitive answer.
So this is for Craig first, and then Michael can chime in. But basically, Tom brings up a point. A triathlete has to swim, has to ride, and has to run. So oftentimes we hear the triathletes come in and say, hey, I think I'm fit okay on the bike, fit efficiently, but my calves blew up and I had to basically walk the last half of the run. What considerations do you give to put a triathlete, what pluses and minuses on each of the fitting and running piece do you put into a triathlete to make sure that they can ride as fast as they can ride, but also have enough that they haven't blown out their legs for the run? What considerations do you give for that?
Are you asking me or Craig?
Yeah, Craig first, and then Michael.
So I always look at everything case by case, looking at what the rider is able to do. But I also recognize that depending on the length of the swim and the fitness of that rider, head, neck, shoulders from the swim could be tight. You could be fatigued. So therefore, we want to have good skeletal support for the upper body when down in aero. And going back to my first point that I made, protecting the hip, keeping the hip open is another factor that I look at. And then also I take into account their running style. Are they a forefoot runner? Are they a heel strike? I get some riders in that were former sprinters, so they get their power from the forefoot. They're used to being on their toes. And now for ultra distance, it's a different creature. But I try to accommodate what they actually are going to do off the bike, more so than saying, well, you're pointing your toes more than I would like. Let's adjust the saddle, and you adjust the saddle, and that it makes no difference in their foot. So I try to meet them where they are at for the running discipline. And then my view on whether or not I was successful, they like to come to me and say, hey, I just had the greatest bike ever. I always ask them, how was the run? Because to me, the run is the point of saying whether the fit was good. If you had a good bike split, well, that's good. But did I destroy your run in the process? So I guess in the end, I'm looking at, good skeletal support of the upper body, the shoulders, head, neck, that were well supported there, and that we're accommodating their running style into factoring in saddle height and foreaft and protect the hip. Those are what I look at most.
So Michael, what are your thoughts when you fit somebody to make sure you don't destroy their run?
Well, I have a question for Craig about adjusting saddle height and foot angle. If he could be a little more in depth about how, okay, is this kind of a runner? So I raise the seat higher to make the foot at a different angle, or I'm curious to hear more about that if he's willing to share with us.
So I try to meet them where they're at. So I'm going to venture to guess that y'all have all experienced, no matter what saddle height you put someone, they still keep their foot the same. Can we agree on that?
Often.
So if a rider is a 4-foot runner and more toe down riding style, then saddle height's going to be a little higher to protect the knee.
I think foot
So
type
it's not
also.
to get as much deep.
I think you have to use foot type as well in that discussion, because if it's a flexible foot, it will not stay high, it will collapse. And if it is a rigid foot, a cavus foot, it will not collapse and you will be in a higher position because of that.
Yeah, I'll jump back in and just say, I think we're in an area that's pretty dangerous to generalize. I think that we have to, Craig
I
was
would
saying,
agree with all of our statements here that, we cannot come to a single number as much as we'd like to in this industry. Everyone wants to have the one answer for saddle height. This is what it is. And we want to narrow it down to single things. We can't do that. I think it's very clear with the 6 of us here that we could spend days writing down all the different factors that we would take into account of how we would fit someone. But the industry and where most people want to go is the idea that I need a number, I need a switch, I need a pill to fix the problem. And we're not looking at it holistically. Now, I believe all of us here look at things holistically. So if we're going to talk about a single question, looking at it in this one isolated scenario, then we could go this route. But we also agree that there's a lot of other factors that we're going to take into account. It's not just one.
yeah, I would second everything that Craig has said and say that if we got together and did some fittings together, even amongst all of us, we would have different styles. There would be variation. The industry wants to say, well, if you put the top 6 fitters together, shouldn't they all come up with the same answer? No. So, I think it would be different. And the beauty of our own practices is that if we're doing follow-ups and making sure that there's success with our fitting, that we talk to them and say, what happened? We did these adjustments, then what was the outcome? So we learn, over time and over doing a lot of fittings. So I agree.
Something I use a lot is that we're humans working with humans. And as long as the human that we're working with recognizes that they're human and we're human, and that we're doing everything we can in a logical path to get them to where they need to be, to support them doing what they need to do, then we're going to be successful. But as soon as we take into it and look at it and say, well, this is an absolute, this is the best person out there to do this, and they failed. And I think that's wrong. I think we have to recognize we're humans working with humans, and that as fitters, we're all different. And as the individuals that we're working with, they're different, and we're going to take into account those things. What we have to be cautious of, and I think as an industry, is the idea that we're going to ignore a lot of big factors. You know, if we're just going to sell a bike to people based upon their physical height, if we're going to set a saddle height solely because of their in-seat, then we're being foolish as an industry. So I think that we have to be looking at it saying, at the core of what we're doing is that we're looking at the human first. And then we're setting the equipment to accommodate the human.
Yeah, so Craig,
I think if we do that, we're good.
I'm going to pass over to Paul, but what I hear from fitters is that the more optimized you make the bike, so we want to achieve this. We want to have them be as fast as possible on the bike and as fast as possible on the run. And a lot of fitters think that if the more efficient I make them on the bike, the run, I make them less optimized and destroying their legs on this, or vice versa. Is there a common thing to look at? Maybe go to Paul. Is there a common thing to look at so you can have the best of both worlds on a tri-fit, keeping into account the run?
Can I jump in quick here?
Yeah,
If you
go
don't
ahead.
mind? Before he answers that, I want to put an idea there. Any of you have experience with velodrome riding and the riders that ride on a velodrome?
Yep.
And if you have, and you look at their positions, you know, they're doing an event that may be 57 seconds long, or whatever the new world record in the kilo is, 56 or something, to, you know, a couple minutes. So duration of the event really affects, you know, what the body can sustain, because, you know, on the velodrome, let's face it, aerodynamics are pretty important. So, you know, you might be able to sustain something for 56 seconds that if you tried to do the same position for an hour, it would kill you. So, you know, there's just, again, many different ways of looking at what's sustainable, what's healthy, what's good for the body, what's fast. All right, that's all I have to say.
Okay, Paul, go ahead.
Answer that question.
Yeah.
But I wanted to just jump off with something that Michael said about follow-up, because it's going to lead to my answer to the question. I have done this a long time, and I've done it in the same area. And so I've got clients that I've had for over 30 years, and I've got new clients and everything in between. And previously, I had always sort of approached it, you know, I'm here, I never charge for a follow-up. Let me know how it's going. I like feedback. If we need to get together again, we can, things like that. And then a little over a year ago, I changed that process and made the follow-up part of the deal, almost insisting, not in a negative way, but saying, we're going to do a follow-up. It's important. It's in person. This is what that looks like, depends on how far we get today and what happens between now and the follow-up. So I don't really dictate the time so much, or even exactly what that's going to look like, except just put it out there as part of the process. And I'll never go back to doing it any other way, because the value in that, even if that follow-up looks like it's great, it's working well, it's just even that confirmation is super valuable and worth that extra visit. But frequently we learn something. So my clients will learn something, and I'll learn something based on their feedback, because now they've had a chance to process everything that I've told them that we've talked about, that they learned, and then now they've been out there riding 2 or 3 weeks or a month or 6 weeks, whatever it looks like. And so now we've really developed a partnership that best case scenario lasts for years. And to the point of just asking the question, how did it work? So there are no definitive answers. And we all know that, you know, the only thing we can say for sure is it depends. So what I would say is know your athlete. Get to know the athlete as well as possible in that first session. That's going to have limitations, like we're not, you know, whatever that is for you guys in your fit studios. For me, it's 3 to 4 hours per session. I'm pursuing all the things I can learn about them before we ever even put them on the bike. So athletic history, orthopedic history, functional assessment, ride life, lack of that, you know, just it's all over the place where people are, or what their starting point is. So from there until they're not our client anymore, they don't ride anymore, it's feedback, it's follow up, it's how's that going? And if they participate in that, and we make that available, they'll see that it has value. I can tell you in my practice, it has incredible value. And that's how we do this. There's no, to Craig's point, there's no set of numbers. It's just, we deal with numbers and angles and, you know, ideas, a lot of different fit methodologies over the years. And I think all that's amazing, as is just having this dialogue amongst ourselves. It's just, and to whoever wants to listen, but yeah, that just making sure, facilitating that process, asking those questions, realizing we don't know it all, communicating that fact to our clients so they understand that it's a process. Anyway, I could talk for a long time on that, but I'll stop.
So Paul, let me rephrase the question. Somebody comes in to you and says, I'm doing a TT event only, or I'm on, as I think Michael or Craig said, I'm on the track and I'm going to do a half an hour all-out event on the track on my tri bike or my TT bike, versus somebody coming in and saying, I'm doing a Olympic distance or a half Ironman on my tri bike, and I do have to run afterwards. Are there any considerations between those two fits that you're going to give? Because one is going to run afterwards and one is not going to run afterwards. Is there any considerations on the bike fit that you would do for one versus the other event?
Absolutely. Totally different positions are possible there. And it would greatly influence what I would do, and depending on the rider and what they're capable of, that idea or that fact is sort of always in the room. So not everybody will be able to handle as aggressive position as maybe somebody else would. And on the other end of the scale, the duration of the event and just the toll that's going to take on the body, just simple things like looking forward. There's things that we can all tolerate if it's a 20-minute bike race or a 3-minute bike race that we would not be willing to tolerate if it was a 6-hour bike race and a run after. So absolutely, same rider, different applications. We would definitely tailor the position differently, unless they did a wide variety of events. Then I might be prone to find a happy medium, because I'm not sure that I would want to, and most of my athletes probably wouldn't want to, and I personally wouldn't want to as an athlete, have to get used to this position, have to get used to that position. So I'm not sure that sometimes it might be a good idea to change the position for an event. But I would also have some hesitance to change it frequently.
Okay, same question to Tom. I think this is an important thing because that's one of the things that some of the tri-fitters are looking at is that what do I look at? What differences would you do in a fit for somebody that's doing a 1 hour
Okay,
TT
so
versus the
keep
try
this
with the run?
real simple. So if you look at those two different disciplines, if you look at track racing and you look at triathlon, the difference is that one has to run afterwards and one doesn't. And hamstrings and glutes are required for running. And one of the reasons why this position of triathlon bikes was developed way back when was in order to protect those muscle groups and keep the glycogen stores in those muscle groups at a high level so that when they transition to running, it is a more efficient transition. At least that's what I've been led to believe, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. That being said, if you look at someone who's doing a short event and you want more power and you're not as concerned with things like comfort and sustainability, if you're only doing 4 to 20 minutes, you can suffer a lot more for 4 to 20 minutes and use a lot more powerful muscles, meaning glutes especially, in order to make that bike go much faster. And you'll be spent and not able to walk or perhaps run afterwards, but you'll be much more effective for that application. So are the positions different? I would say they're drastically different. And I would say, depending on a person's functionality, if a person is doing a short triathlon event, and like, for instance, they're doing a sprint distance and they're fairly functional, put them in a less aerodynamic position that gives them more glute activation and give them more power, they will cover more ground in less time and still be able to run effective enough to be able to finish the event in less time. So it's a matter of how capable are they and what are they trying to accomplish. So if you don't take those things into account, and I appreciate the happy medium thing, because often we're fitting for this happy medium position because people want to do everything, and they want it to carry a 4x8 sheet of plywood, and they want it to, be able to get 80 miles to the gallon. But the fact of the matter is, it can't do that effectively. So you have to draw lines in the sand. If they're willing to spend the money in order to make the changes for the event specific application, oh my gosh, the world is your oyster. So.
Okay, yeah, Happy, you had a comment, and then we'll feed you into the next question.
Let's start with the problem is we're all assuming stock bikes. If we had more adjustability of the bike to the body for a triathlete, I think we can make them much more efficient. In addition to which, we were talking about the plumb. Well, the plumb is just an arbitrary point measured to another arbitrary point. It doesn't necessarily show us any particular improvement. It just says this point is visible from the outside going to this point. So as far as my fits go, I ignore them. As far as my tri-fits go, it's no different than my road fit in that I'm going to find where they are most efficient on a bike for their purposes. So I'm looking not at a string hanging down, but I'm looking at multiple joints in a row functioning harmony, not one spot, not taking the knee in isolation. I'm looking at knee and hip and ankle, or knee, hip, and lower back, so that everything functions with the joints above or below where you're at, so you get the least amount of strain and the most efficiency. As far as lower extremity is concerned, I'm looking at the calf. The calf is more important than we give it credit for. Yep. It's the second largest vascular pump in the body. So if it's not activating and you're not getting the pumping action of the calf, you're spending a huge amount of energy on vascular return from the heart pumping, pushing fluid down to push fluid up. So it all depends on how we determine what efficiency is as to how efficient we make somebody. We tend to pick arbitrary points in cycling and say this is the point for this purpose because somebody wrote a paper about it. But we don't explore further as to what happens when you do that. And on that, I'll let other people get in.
That's good. That's good. Craig, any comments?
I like what Happy said about the most efficient for the purposes. You know, what are we trying to do? And that leads back to what Michael was saying about velodrome, and we're looking at differences between TT and road. I dabbled in triathlon for a brief bit, and I could say my tri position was radically different than my time trial position when I was a competitive time trialer. When I time trialed, I didn't have to worry about even walking after the time trial. And there were times that I found it difficult to even walk. Those were in the early days. I would agree on that. Happy does bring up a good point about the vascular return and the importance of the calf. But as he pointed out too, we're not going into the muscle either. We're not measuring true muscle activity. You know, we have these charts to say at this point, pedal stroke, this muscle is being activated and all that. But to my knowledge on that, those charts just say there was activity. It doesn't say what type of activity. So are we actually contracting or are we stretching those? So my view on it is it still comes back to, is it sustainable for the rider for the event that they're going to do and for them?
Okay.
I have some riders that can maintain a really low position. They have the flexibility, they have the range of motion, and they're very successful in a low position. I have other riders that, you know, I'm sitting with 35, 40-degree back angles in a tri position because they just can't do it. And then to Happy's point, should they be on a road bike? Yeah, they could be. But going back to the other conversation of we're putting aero bars on a road bike for a secondary place to go to. I have riders with aero bars on road bikes that are doing long distance. And when you watch them go into aero, their back doesn't move. They keep the same position. So it's really just another place to go for them. So, you know, what are they trying to do? Are they trying to win the event? Or are they trying to finish the event? Are they there for their friends and family and the enjoyment of doing it? Or are we going after, you know, that, you know, first, second, third place medal?
Mhm.
I tell a story. I had an elite rider in one time, and he asked me, he goes, do you do the same process for everyone? You know, the off-bike assessment, looking at all these different factors. And I said, yes, I do. And he goes, well, you should really only be doing it for us. And he's saying the elite racers. And as I asked him to elaborate, he said, well, my goals are more important. And I said, okay, so you're looking for an extra 15, 20 seconds in a time trial so that you can win. That's your goal, right? And he goes, yeah, so I can win. And I said, well, I just had a rider in, and her goal was to ride across the state of Ohio with her dad before he passes away from cancer because he has terminal cancer. Whose goal is more important? Well, each goal is important to the individual rider, and we have to support their goals, whatever they are. If it's riding across Ohio or it's an Olympic gold medal, whatever it is, it's up to us to support that as best we can.
Mhm. Which go coming into the next question for Michael. What's the best approach for overall positioning for a triathlon in time trials when it comes to balancing comfort, sound biomechanics, bike control, aerodynamics, etc.?
I think I couldn't put it any better than was just said. I mean, that story that he tells
Yep.
about working with those different people couldn't be topped. There's no way. I mean, we're here to help people, and we're here to listen to their individual needs and make an assessment and do a follow-up, because if we don't do a follow-up, we don't even know what happened. Like, you know, what an opportunity by doing a follow-up, what an opportunity to connect with that person and to, you know, isn't science all about a hypothesis that you prove or disprove? So you're never going to know unless you come back and ask someone what happened, and you care. You know that everybody's goal is, whatever it is. Like he said, whether it was riding with her father or whether it was, the gold medal. They're both equal. They're both important to those people.
Yep.
So I couldn't say it any better than that.
I kind of think that the comfort is the number one, what fitters would want to look at, because that was brought up. I'm going to kind of summarize what I've heard so far in the discussions here. Comfort seems to be the number one thing to go after, because if they're comfortable, they're able to hold that position longer and be faster overall for an event. Sound biomechanics, of course, that comes with the fitting. Are they too low or too high in the saddle? That's something. But again, comfort. Why position them too low in the cockpit if they can't hold that position for more than 30 seconds, versus if you relax that position, now they can hold it for 15, 20 minutes. Bike control, that goes back to what Happy was saying. Maybe in the off season, they want to be on a road bike, get some ride with some group rides, get some bike control, some good bike handling skills together. And I think aerodynamics is probably the least important, because again, I can make somebody as aero as possible, but if they can only hold that position for a few seconds and then sit up and say, "Oh, my back," and then how aero is that when they stop pedaling and they're sitting up into the wind? So that's what I think beginning fitters or people that are starting to fit triathletes, I would think, look at comfort, some good biomechanics based on a good sound fit, bike control on the off season, and aerodynamics is probably the least of your worries. Tom, what do you
But
think?
the aerodynamics though are what people come in and they're like, oh, I got to be aero. We have
Yeah.
it's
Yes,
institutionalized
true.
in the sport of cycling. I have to have very light. So my bike's got to be super light, even though in my case, I'm carrying an extra 60 pounds right now. But I have to have a very light bike. And I have to be aero. Light and aero are the most important things. And we give up performance due to that.
Yes, yes, true.
And Phil Burt, who is physio for Team Sky, he and I were having a conversation many years ago, and he was talking about bringing up Wiggins, raising his time trial position, going against the wind tunnel, and
Yep.
the fight that he had with the team to get that to happen. And he said, I guarantee that he's going to perform better in a less aero position than he would in the aero position that the wind tunnel is dictating. And he argued his point. He ended up winning, and Wiggins ended up winning. So I think that also may have been a start to this conversation. But I've been in this space since 2009. I still see the majority of what's going on fit-wise still to be stuck in the 70s and 80s. That we're still not looking at overall as an industry.
I was there. It wasn't pretty.
Go ahead, Michael, and then I'll finish up.
Yeah.
This was back when I did Trek's Fit program, but for some reason they wanted us to go over to Kona and observe the Ironman triathlon. And I thought, great, this will be fun. So I took a camera and I walked through the area where the bikes were, took pictures of how the setups were on the bikes, watched them get ready for the swim, and then we drove out to about the 70-mile mark, and in that 70-mile mark there was a pretty long gradual hill, but nothing, not a big hill, a big chain ring kind of hill, but long. And so we camped out there, and as the riders came back, hit that 70-mile part, we photographed them, and we did all these essays of photographs. and counted the number of riders. Also, X number of riders go by. Here's the position of the riders. 7 out of 10 riders were out of the aero bars at the 70-mile mark on this part of the course. So they were on their base bars, 7 out of 10. So what kind of a position is that? You know, they couldn't sustain it. They weren't able to stay on their aero bars going up this long grade in the big chain ring. And, you know, and I just looked at that and said, there's something wrong here. So that's just something I observed.
Interesting, interesting.
Okay, one of the things that I've heard over and over again is the importance of a follow-up. And I would like to expand on that just a little bit to give my experience. I try to schedule the follow-up before they leave from the existing fitting. Regardless of when that might be. If it's convenient for them to do it in 3 or 4 weeks, that's great. If it's not for 2 months, that's great. This time of year, you know, in Ohio, we don't get to ride outside until April. So if it's not until after tax season, then that's fine, whatever is necessary. But I try to get it on paper so that it's in their mind that it's expected. And I often tell people this, and this, you know, despite Happy and Michael both being mentors and having taught me much of everything that I know, I didn't learn anything truly new about bike fitting until I had people come back to me in the follow-up and they weren't happy. When people come back and what you've tried is not as successful as you were hoping it was, you're forced to do something that you wouldn't normally do. And when that happens, you're forced to, go outside of the box. And, what works for some people doesn't work for others. And, you may try, for instance, you may try wedging or arch supports or, pick your thing, whatever it might be, and whatever contact point you're fighting with. And it works for somebody and they're happy, to quote Chris Balzer, anything better than crap is great. So yes, if you're getting good success, that's awesome. But when people come back and they're not happy, you have to try something. And sometimes it's way outside of the box. And that's what made me realize that sometimes you just have to step back and take a real holistic view, full big picture, and see, okay, well, this might work for you. And it's not what would traditionally be something that people might pursue, but you have a unique issue. And, if we don't try it, we don't know if it works. And any intervention, regardless of how strange or, strange it might be, as long as it finds success, it doesn't matter what it is. So that would be my biggest suggestion with people that are new to fitting, especially, is don't be afraid to try something different, because if it's successful, then it might work and you won't be afraid to try it again. But if you're afraid to try it in the first place, you won't ever know. So explore outside of the box.
No, good points. I think there's another caveat to that, is that follow-up is good, but I think there's a length of time. What if you do a fit on Friday and they come back Sunday and say, oh, this is horrible? Has there been enough time for the body to adapt to the new fit? Sometimes it takes 2 weeks. Sometimes it takes a little bit more than 2 weeks so there has to be some time limit that you're going to give them to get used to the new fit, especially if you do some radical thing, like have to raise the saddle 3 inches or something out of the ordinary, that to get them fit correctly, they're used to that low saddle. So again, it's to kind of take that into consideration too.
I would
Rick,
agree.
I think
Michael.
if you see at the end of a weekend, there's still something wrong, and you may have to cut back a little bit because they're not tolerating it, and they won't train and they won't ride. If they're not tolerating, they'll complain. And so you have to look at how quickly the response is to what you do. If it's 2 or 3 weeks, that's an adjustment issue. If it's a weekend, that's we got to take another look at you circumstance. I mean, it may be the same complaint, but one is clearly not tolerating, and one is having those little things that don't fall into place right away.
And I might agree with that in that sometimes I do mountain bike fittings, and often we're taking people's saddles down and back to get better glute activation and get their body weight farther back on the bike. And often their knees won't handle that much of a change. If you're making a drastic change in saddle height on a mountain bike and their knees start to scream right out of the gate, we may incrementally go down there. So you know, 1 month at 1/4 of that change and another month at another quarter of that change. And you finally inch your way down to where you really want them to be, and you allow their body to slowly adapt to that position. Sometimes that's the best course of action instead of making that jump all at once.
Yeah, an adaptive fit. And the other issue is that most road bikes come with 172.5 cranks. Most mountain bikes come with 175. And if you're a 5'2" female and you have 175 cranks on your bike, you're probably going to have knee pain, no matter where you put them.
In the
So, Michael,
garbage.
you had a point? Michael?
I'm just, we're after the halfway point. I was trying to
Oh, yeah,
interject.
yeah. So I'll have one more quick question for Paul, kind of a fun one to close with, and I'll transition over to Michael. Athlete comes into you and says, I've never had a fitting before. I got my brand new TT bike. It's Friday and I'm racing Saturday. Do me a fit. So how close to a fit, or how close to a event do you do a fit?
Well, that's never happened before. I had a client a couple of years ago that his first ride on his new bike didn't happen before he came to see me. It happened after I fit him, and it was in an Ironman. So yeah, crazy stuff happens, and it's all good. I think it went better than if I didn't try to help him. So that's good. But yeah, I think all of us would agree we don't want to make really any changes. I don't know what the number is. It's probably 6 weeks in my mind. And
that's my magic number. If we're 6 weeks out from a big event, I'm not touching you. And
yeah,
I've had riders that go and do something and then they are in PT for 6 months and have all sorts of issues, and then they come see me and we get it all straight again. But yeah, my cutoff is 6 weeks, unless there is something that the rider cannot, they won't complete the event. No matter what, they're not going to complete the event.
I kind of treat it a little differently. I don't want to touch them in the 6 weeks, but if they had a crash or there's some other injury and they're still going out there, I will take a look at them to see if we can accommodate the injury within a much tighter window, often the week before, because they're going to go no matter what. And if we can accommodate it, it reminds me of a road race years ago in the Tour. Who you may remember when Talansky fell and his back was killing him, and he hung on for 3 days after the crash before he couldn't beat the Lantern Rouge. And the point is, they didn't touch his bike. Everything was about treating him, but nobody was accommodating for the inflammation or the lack of flexibility. This is where we come in, and we should be able to help, but we're often not given the opportunity.
Good point. Well, with that, I will transition over to Michael. Why don't you give us kind of a quick, as part two, what we're going to be, what you're going to do. You're going to be the moderator at this point and lead us into the next points.
So thank you. I'm going to refer back to the moderator on the first webinar, which I think was Sue, right?
Yes.
Rick?
Yep, Sue.
And the first two questions that Sue asked the panel, and I wasn't on the panel, the first two questions were, does the bike fit industry, does it have an association? And you guys kind of looked at each other and went, no, not really. And then the second question was, does the industry support bike fitting? And you looked at each other and kind of went, no. And I was in the audience and I said, oh my God, this woman in the first two questions has identified something that I personally feel like, oh man, I've been wanting to hear that for years. because I've been in doing fittings and doing teachings in schools, but it's all disorganized. So I'm going to start by saying I am really excited and happy to be associated with each one of you. I think this association that we have is a blessing. It's amazing. So those first two questions sent me immediately in a different direction. And I said, okay, I got to do some research and I need each of you to help me. So today I have some questions for you. And my goal, so I talked about how I appreciated this association with you. My first question is, do we want an association for bike fitters? Does it already exist? And I have a bunch of questions around that. So after you answer that, at the same time, you can say, oh, it already exists. You just go here and here's the association. Because I don't know everything. I don't know all around the world, but I'd love to hear your ideas. So whoever wants to jump in there, do we want an association? Do we need accreditation, testing? What should we do?
I think
Who
the
wants-
closest thing we have right now is IBFI. And I think that's what Andy tried to start it with, was the put some basically some realism into fitting, meaning that have an association that is or has some kind of accreditation. So when people go into a bike fitter, it's not the Wild West where they just kind of do this and this and okay, you're fit and here's your $400 and you're out the door. We want to basically do no harm. I've heard that from a number of high-level fitters, meaning that when the person leaves your shop, they should not be in a worse condition than when they came in. So things like that is what we're trying to do, that I would like to see in the industry, where we're putting some kind of accreditation, some knowledge, some coursework, some information into the fitters so they know kind of what they're doing. And as everybody was kind of talking about it, when a person comes in, it depends on what they want to do, what type of event they are, what type of mobility they have, et cetera, of how you're going to fit them. So there's going to be no two fits are going to be exactly the same. So there's no really rule book. In my opinion, everybody's a custom fit, because it's a custom body. So that's what you want to try to achieve, I would think, is some coordination and control over the bike fitters, and so they know what they're doing.
Is there a place in the world that contains a good amount of bike fit knowledge? I mean, if we're going to do an association, shouldn't it somehow contain everything that we want to contribute to it? And it doesn't matter if it is slightly different, but all the ideas you start to see, even in our association, our little association here, you summarized today and you said, oh, I'm hearing a lot about follow-up and these different points. So as more information comes in, then we start to see overlap, like, oh yeah, I do that too. And I'm 67. I'm supposed to go till I'm 70, according to my financial person. And it's like, man, what if Happy and I retire and Paul retires? All this knowledge just goes, it's gone.
Yeah.
Right. So if we're going to do an association, or if IBFI is the association, is it meeting all the needs that we have? What are we getting from it? Or can we talk to Andy and say, hey, Andy, what about this and this and this? Can we expand this? And, so tell me your ideas, guys.
Well, let me start with, how do we determine who knows what? I mean, I've always used longevity as the rule for knowledge. If you're practicing and you're successful and you've been doing it more than 10 years, it's not an accident. If you come into it by all the toys, bells, and whistles, how do we know you know how to use them? Is there a training course that teaches you how to read force plates? No. Is there a training course that teaches you how to do motion capture? No. We see people investing thousands in technology, but don't necessarily know how to operate it, and don't realize when they buy the technology, they're not buying the knowledge, and they may not know enough to know that there is knowledge out there for the use of such equipment. So how do we judge who the top fitters are? Again, my criteria has been longevity and low complaints. When I put my 20 years in the hospital, they followed the outcomes of all my fits. So I knew whether I was successful or not with everybody. We don't track outcomes as an industry. Interesting idea, way of determining whether people are successful.
So we have training, credibility. What other things would you like to see your association? What other things would you like to get from your association? Like if you're gonna, if there is an association, let's just say, hypothetically, we have this association. What are you willing to pay a year for your membership, and what do you want from that association that you feel like, yeah, this is really cool, I want to be a part of this? And then as you're answering those first two questions, the third part of that would be, how many bike fitters are there? Even if you generalize and say you're just a bike fitter, how many are there in the world? I'd be curious to hear what you guys think.
Okay, so Michael, I think some of the issues are that we got to make a U-turn. And the reason I'm saying U-turn is because a lot of the fitting courses now are how to run the machine, not anything behind the machine. So I think the first thing the fitters need to do is learn anatomy. I've seen bike fits on YouTube where they take the iliac crest instead of the greater trochanter as the top pivot point. Think things like that. Kinesiology, biomechanics, physiology. These are the things that are fundamental. So when you get somebody on a bike, you know what you're looking at instead of relying on a machine, a piece of software to tell you to move it up, the saddle up, move it down. Understanding that if a person if you have 10 people with the same lower leg length, if somebody has a longer femur than a longer tibia, a shorter tibia, their knee's going to be in a different position at the top of the pedal stroke than if somebody has a longer tibia and a shorter femur. Right? The longer tibia is going to drive the knee higher in the pedal stroke. So all these things are fundamental to before you should even start bike fitting. Number two is, where is your association going to be geared? What audience is your association going to be geared towards? Because the laws in Europe are different than they are over here. In Europe, they have physiotherapists. Over here, we got physical therapists, different occupations. Over there, they can put the needles in and determine electrical connectivity between the muscles. Over here, you need to be a PT with a 2-year residency before you can do that. So there's a lot of things like that, and also it might be good let's get the other Paul, Tom, Craig. What are your thoughts?
Three things come to my mind. I'm enjoying this small association and gaining a lot from it. Not just the webinars, but in conversations off the webinar with Happy, for instance. what I like about this association as it's been is it hasn't been about the brand of bike fitting that you're doing. That's just not something that we're even talking about. We're connecting out of the motive of helping people, and I'm a little bit blown away by that and excited about that. So
It is a good
to me,
thing.
that's the main thing. And so community is a big deal and it's valuable. Not the fact that it's not built around someone's brand, which polarizes things, I think it can be a negative thing. But at the same time, then the second thing I would say is education. So there's lots of different schools of thoughts. There's lots of different bike fitters. And I think everyone has something to add to the story. Like if you've been doing this a while, to Happy's point, and it's going well, then you know some things that I'd like to hear. So some way that interaction could happen is amazing. We could all find paper and read paper, but I've done some of that. I'm sure many in this call have done more than I have. It's valuable, but having a conversation about that paper from the mouth of the person that wrote it would be more valuable to me, because you just don't have context in my mind. So that was it. Community, education, and the idea that it's helping people is the brand, not, this is the kingdom of bike fitting that I built and you can buy this thing and do our training. And I think all that's great too. Like I've got great tools. I've utilized Retool since it was created in 2008. It's a valuable tool to me. I've got the bikefitting.com fit bike. I can measure load. These are valuable things. And there are other things. How do we put all that into the context of a community that grows the whole thing up? There are lots of specifics and steps to that, but that's what I'd be interested in, and we're doing on a certain level right now.
My goal with bringing this up this week with you is not to go a certain direction. It's more to try to figure out, can we house all of these things? I mean, training, credibility, anatomy, kinesiology, community, all those pieces are great, but I'm kind of wanting to house them. How do we? I don't know where that note is coming from, but
I don't know.
anyway, not to go a certain
Well, I think
direction.
I'm having technical difficulties.
Okay. Tom or Craig, thoughts?
If
So-
I may,
Yeah, go ahead.
I started out with my knowledge in bike fitting 10 or so, 12 years ago. And I didn't know anything. I had been in the bike industry for 30 years, 20 years at that point. And I got involved in bike fitting. And in the Midwest, of course, we're always behind the two coasts on this country because, we're slow and, we aren't as well educated. But the fact of the matter is, my biggest challenge was, where do I learn this skill? And what I learned through educational pieces was there's a bunch of different methods to learn, and those methods all have a certain amount of value in isolation. And on a holistic whole, they don't always apply. So you have to go and learn as much as you can, and you're going to apply very little from each one of those small things in an actual fitting. So you may pull like 2 things from here and 3 things from here and 5 things from here and apply those in a single bike fitting in order to get a successful outcome. And what I really came to was when I realized that, you know, the IBFI, for instance, was being formed. I was a level 1 fitter. I've come up through the IBFI from the very beginning in 2015 as a level 1 fitter, and I didn't know anything. I was an idiot, for lack of a better term, and I just fumbled my way through, and I started doing fittings, and I started helping people more than anything, and applying the knowledge that I had at the time. And I gained more knowledge, and I got more application and more clients, and I learned more, and I now I'm thousands of fittings deep, and there's many things that I've set aside and I don't even use or practice anymore. I still know them, and if they apply, I might apply them, but they're a lot less likely because they're less likely to get outcomes that are positive. So when I think of an organization or some type of association, there's 3 things that I think I would value more than anything else. And I think inexpensive, or quite frankly, free interaction of ideas between people will grow knowledge faster than any single thing we can do. 2, educational value that's not based on this is the right or wrong thing to do. This is just something to do. And here's an application where it will be valuable, regardless of what that piece of education is. And then, of course, the third thing, and I think this will be the biggest challenge for any association that starts out. And if you look at the auto industry and their mechanical educational basis, or if you look at even the medical industry, the hardest part of what we deal with is insurance. We live in a land where everybody likes to sue each other for whatever reason. And of course, if somebody comes into us and has a bad experience or has an experience that isn't as successful as they might hope, and they get hurt, yes, we'd like to think we do no harm, but the fact of the matter is that's not often within our control. We deal with a lot of people that are A-type personalities, and they're going to do what they want, and we can't control what they do, and they're going to hurt themselves, and they're going to blame someone. And often we, as the last person they may have been in contact with that changed something on their bike, may be the person they go after. I think that'll be the biggest challenge, and I don't know if it's something we even want to tackle. I don't know if it's worth our time. If you look at the bike industry as a whole, especially over the last 30, 40, even 50 years, bike industry's lazy. They're just looking for that almighty dollar. If you look at manufacturers, if you look at, even bike shops in general, they're not concerned with us or our industry as far as bike fitting is concerned. They are looking to sell machines, and they're not concerned with people. They're concerned with product. That's where our industry is lacking more than anything else. Until we can change the focus to the individual and away from the product that they're on, we're just spinning our wheels. So that's my 2 cents.
Great. What about
We haven't heard from Happy yet.
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead, Happy, your opinion, your thoughts.
Well, having been around longer than most, one of the things I've learned is we don't know our own history. And without knowing that, we're doomed to repeat our mistakes. So I think one of the things we need to consider as an organization is developing institutional memory, history of things done that worked, that didn't, and why, in addition to the fact that they were done by people. And there should be some recognition of, for example, the creation of the size cycle, the first use of motion capture, the first use of EMGs, the first use of force plates. All of this technology that people talk about had to start somewhere and evolve. So I think we should document that so people know where we've come from. We should document who educated, and we also need to recognize where the ideas and thoughts of fitting come from. They don't necessarily come from a committee meeting. They often come from one guy tinkering in a bike shop after hours when he should be home with his family. But we have none of that in our base, and we need it. In addition to providing some sort of cohesive tape to tape us together as a unit, we had an organization of fitters about 25, 30 years ago when the original Serrata school started, and their membership was based on how many dollars you sold and how many units you sold. Didn't say whether you were a better fitter. The assumption was we sell more, therefore we are better. Didn't say you had more skills. You might have just been located in the right neighborhood. So that was the first failure that I remember in a bike fitters organization. And I've been there for a few others. And everything seems to be based about profits and product and not about what we need as fitters and what do we not know we need, things we're going to need to develop if we're going to evolve, and recognition that there's a lot of knowledge out there that we can get from other sports and from the institutions of higher learning, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time.
So thank you, Happy. I want to quickly just share, I've kind of been doing a bunch of calling people and talking to people about this. And I called up Joe Vitabunkor, who Joe was the head person at Trek during the period that I was there. John Burke owned Trek, but Joe was who ran the company. And Joe was who originally allowed me to create the program for Trek. So I called him up and he agreed to talk on the phone, and we had a nice conversation, quite a long conversation. And he said, yeah, if you need more, call me anytime. And I said, the question I had for him was, what happened to the Trek Fit program? Like, why, it seemed like it had a good beginning and it was a good thing. And why did it go away? And, we talked, and the bottom line was it wasn't a return on investment for them. In other words, they weren't getting enough money from the program to justify what they were spending on the program. So, it was a financial decision that they said, we don't need to do this to sell our bikes. And that was a very interesting conversation for sure. I would be curious, Craig and Paul, you guys, if you could weigh in on what you think about some of these ideas, that'd be great.
So do you want to go? I think you're muted, Paul. We can't hear you again.
Go
There you
ahead,
go.
Craig.
Go ahead, Paul.
Go ahead, Paul.
I'm having ideas, just listening to you guys, and I'm not sure. So I'll just randomly go through what's popping into my mind. I think maybe there are other industries that have had some kind of an association. I'm the wrong guy to ask on that, but maybe this kind of association is happening in some other industry. I don't know. So there might be something we could research there and just say, how did this look over here? The other thing is the education part. That's going to take time. There is financial considerations to make if we decide to do something. And I probably should have said this first, but it may sound really simple, but the first step is decide that we want to, right? And then making that decision then will lead to the next steps. And the to Tom's point, you know, low cost or free, I get that. But if our time is valuable, everyone's time is valuable, and we're all busy as bike fitters. So I don't know what that looks like, but I don't think it can be free. I do think that an accreditation for the education, and that could be cross branded, if you will. I'm not even sure that's the right word, but if there is a consensus among maybe it looks like a board that this stream of thought has something to share, then we could incorporate that into the process. And then it's, you know, videos aren't hard to make. There may be some content that's already been done, but then it's I don't know if you're familiar with Shimano S-Tech. You know, they make a video, you watch the video, and there's a little test. It's just a verification that you actually did it. I think that has value. As soon as you include or try to work with a bigger engine like a Trek or a Cervelo, or I don't know, whoever it is, Retool, it can be anything. As soon as you sort of connect to that one branded thing, then it takes on the temptation is to sell that thing, right? So somehow, yeah, I think there is a financial side to this, and I think it would have enough. I know it would have enough value to me that I would pay for it. And we're a long way from figuring out the details, but back to, we won't get there until we decide we want to do it. And I want to see it. I would offer what I have to contribute. I'd enjoy it. And I think it does need to happen. In my area, all the bike shops, and we're 3 million people here, all of the bike shops don't want to do bike fit. They're all sending them to me, and I'm super humbled and grateful for that. But it is not bike fitting, and I've done bike fitting in a bike shop setting, and I'm not saying it can't work, but it has challenges in that environment because they are trying to ring that cash register every day, and we can slow down that process. We can facilitate that process. So I don't think we go back to that. I think it stands outside that retail situation.
So what would you be willing to pay per year if there was an association that you looked at and you said, wow, this is great, this has all the pieces I want? What would be reasonable to you that you would feel really good about saying, this association's working, this is great, I'll be a part of this, and here's my money? What would that be? How much?
I spent $1,000 to utilize this bikefitting.com fit bike, and all the benefit of that is I get to use it, and they get to view my work, and I pay $1,000 a year for that, and I'm okay with that. It's a great tool, but you know, it's at least that. It's at least that, or maybe if just another idea that I'm having is if you're new and you're not ready to contribute educationally, then it's this price. If you're on the faculty, if you will, you're a part of making this happen, maybe it's less expensive. Maybe if you have more of an administrative role in it where you're making it happen, and that's taking you 20 hours of your week, then you're paid to do that. So I've got lots of ideas. I'm just throwing them out there.
Yeah, what about the rest of you? What would you pay for your dream association that is giving back to you what you feel like is good content, good education? What would the rest of you be willing to pay? I'm not going to send you a bill. I'm just curious to hear what people feel about this. And I like Paul, that you're willing to look at it from what are you doing, how much you're already giving from a contribution standard, whether you're helping with the training or so. Jump in there.
So in this vein, I think back to in 2015 when I first got involved in the IBFI, and I was looking, I was working in a bike shop and I was fitting, and I was working in an environment that was a challenge to say the very least, because fitting in a bike shop environment was challenging to say the very least. But I liked what their vision was, the actual, what they said the idea of what they were trying to accomplish was. And I was like, 10, 15 bucks a month seemed, minuscule in the scope of what they were trying to accomplish. And I'm like, I've wasted 15 bucks a month on much worse things. And, this is nothing in comparison to that. So let's just, let's get involved. And not long after that, I get involved in their mentorship program, and I managed their mentorship program for several years, and fitting very experienced fitters and less experienced fitters together in order to educate new fitters into new practices. And it was a challenge because there were language barriers and, of course, geographical barriers and all that kind of stuff. But the fact of the matter was, there was just so much logistics involved in this that it was like, yes, I'm donating a great deal of my time and effort, and I'm spending a great deal of time outside of what puts dollars in my pocket and, provides a living for me, that I didn't feel like it was worth the return. And again, we come back to if you look at the bike industry in general, the bike industry is trying to sell bikes. They aren't concerned with the person that's on the bike. They don't care if they fit. They don't care if you buy a 54, 56, 58. None of that matters to them. They're concerned with, did we sell the bike? And I keep coming back to that in my mind of, when I look at an association, I'm more concerned with the person that's involved in the association. Are they getting out of it something that is of value to them? And most people that are at a level that, us six are not looking for education. Frankly, I haven't done any new education in several years, because the education has come by actually doing bike fitting, not by going out and searching out new educational practices in a formal setting, as much as give me that crazy person that has the spinal fusion or the dual hip replacement or bilateral knee replacement, or pick your orthopedic challenge of the day. Those I learn much more from than what I would learn by going to a Trek seminar and sitting in on watching how to run a retool kit, for instance. And not that I would not gain something out of that, something that I learned long time ago. When you go to a seminar like that, you need to pull something out of that seminar that you can put into practice on Monday morning. If you leave that weekend or that seminar and you don't have something that you can put into practice right away, that was a failure. And it wasn't worth any of the dollars that you invested. But if you can put something into practice right away, then it was worth your investment. And the more education you gain, the less it is likely that you're going to be able to pull something out of that educational investment that you can apply on Monday morning, because we've seen more and we've done more, and it's just, that's the nature of higher education. Talk to anybody that's a doctoral candidate, for instance. You talk to other doctoral candidates, my God, you're going to school and it's like, well, I already know that stuff. And, I'm more specific and focused than that. I'm way beyond this basic class. So I struggle with that whole concept, but it's worth pursuing. But again, we struggle with how to pursue it.
So
Michael, no, real quick after then Craig, but just something to think about. We got a couple fitters in the audience. You might want to poll them as well after Craig?
So one of my focuses with my PhD is in organizational theory and institutional theory. Not to dive too deep into that, but one of the things that I'm seeing here is we lack legitimacy in our field. Each of us have legitimacy in our own practices, meaning that we have access to resources. But as a field, we don't have access to resources. We are not recognized as a field, as an organization. To say Trek is going to dump resources into what we want to do. Specialized is going to dump resources. We don't have that legitimacy. Our field is very fragmented. We lack organization, we lack structure, we lack common practices, we lack common rules. So, and we're in a fragmented industry to begin with. We can't even agree on bottom bracket standardization. I mean, we keep coming up with new stuff. We keep coming up with proprietary things in the industry. So everything still feeds on this idea of you're an individual, you're doing your individual thing. An individual manufacturer is doing their individual thing. And what's the common element? Anymore, it's about the wheels. You know, a set of wheels. Yeah, well, actually, even that, we get into some differences. But one thing I think that as an organization that we should be focusing on is not our own education, not even the education of fitters right now. I think we should be focusing on educating the consumer.
Public.
The consumer needs to demand more from the industry. That's what needs to happen. At that point, when we get the pressure from the stakeholders. So stakeholder is anyone that can affect the outcome of an organization, okay? So if the consumer, major stakeholder, fitter, stakeholder, bike shop stakeholder, manufacturer stakeholder, when the consumer starts to say, hey, I have the power with my dollars, I am going to revoke legitimacy of this bike manufacturer or cycling altogether because you guys don't support my needs. So I think we need to be, if we were to focus on educating the consumer first, I think that would add more value to everyone than just trying to say, we're going to watch a webinar, we're going to check a box. Because I've done the Shimano things too. And you go through and at the end, you can answer some questions. And then basically I watched the video. It doesn't say anything about whether I learned anything. So if it's going to be that, it's just a checkbox and we're going to move on. And I think all of us agree here, we have legitimacy in our own right. What we are trying to say is we want legitimacy for our field that doesn't exist right now. So how do we get there? And rather than trying to figure out and you know, the idea here is how much would you pay for something? Let's throw that out altogether. Let's just say, what is the minimum thing that we want to provide to the world or just to the US, to our community? What do we want to give them? And initially, once we determine what the minimum, it would be called a minimum viable product in the lean methodology. So developing out a minimum viable product to get out there and say, we're organized right now, and it may just be the 6 of us. We're organized today, and we produce this minimum viable product, and we put it out for the world. And then we build from there, and we say, what does our stakeholders demand of us instead of us dictating what we think they need?
Well, I can tell you what we
That's my
provide.
view.
We provide retention. We keep people on bikes. We are the last stop before the bike becomes a coat rack.
But we should be the first stop
That's
before even buying. So we should get
I
to the
know
coat
that.
rack point. So that's the
I know.
consumer education that we need to be providing. We need to be saying why our field is important. Why are we important? And
I
I
have
can
had,
say our customers that we all have agree that we're important, but I can only see about
I
600
have
bikes
had,
a year. That's my capacity. And
So,
2/3 of those are returning clients.
so I want
I have
to,
had,
I want to
continue.
piggyback on Craig for a second and say, consumer education, I totally agree with. And I spoke with Joe Bettabunkor at Trek, and he confirmed what I thought, which was, yeah, the program was too expensive. There was, the bottom line was educating bike fitters was a dead end for them. And I said, well, if we have formed an association and asked you as a supplier of bikes, would you be willing, do you think that Trek would be willing to allow some form of small but effective way on their website to talk about bike fitting? Because the manufacturers have a huge opportunity to educate their public. And if Trek was willing to acknowledge that bike fitting was important, and here's a little part of that on their website, then it wouldn't cost them anything other than developing that little section of the website. They don't have to maintenance it or do anything with their dealers, but then it would begin to make what we do more legitimate. And so that's, my question to you guys is, okay, so we're educating the public, great. How do we educate the public? What's the loudspeaker that's telling everybody about bike fitting? I totally agree. You sit on an airplane flying somewhere and people ask you, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a bike fitter. You're a pipe fitter? No, I'm a bike fitter. What the hell's that? So
Yeah.
yes, education. Go ahead.
But here's the other part that we've got to deal with here is more and more, if not all manufacturers now are going direct to consumer, cutting dealers out. And they're still, I mean, I can pull up, just pick one manufacturer, I could pull it up, they're direct to consumer, and they're selling bikes based upon a growth chart. How tall are you? And over and over and over again. So to me, the industry is flawed in that sense. If we're saying that we really value and want people to ride, I mean, we're all passionate cyclists. We've all of us I'm sure have been in cycling for 30 plus years minimum. Would that be?
Yep.
So we're passionate about it, and we think it's a great thing, and it's something that we can go through life doing. It doesn't, I've got riders in their 90s. It doesn't end when you graduate high school. It doesn't end when you graduate college. It doesn't end when you leave professional. It goes with you. So when we look at that, say, this is a great thing that we have here to maintain fitness and well-being and our personal enjoyment in life. Yet our actions as an industry don't support that. So it has to take on more of the grassroots. It's got to be the public demanding it. And that's where I think, and I've done this with a few clubs, I don't do it enough. I've done it a few times. I really enjoy doing it. It takes time. And you sit there and you go, wow, I don't have much time because I've got these clients, got to make money. But, going in front of these small cycling clubs and explaining what it is, what are the differences. And then if we had behind each of us, because right now it's my individual voice, it's not a collective, it's not the field. And if we were to go out and say, here's our message, and we're going to give this message to our local clubs, and we're going to get it to spread that way, we could then say, and by the way, here is a website to the association, and also here's the marketing piece for me to sell you a bike fit to. Win-win. But get into the education side.
We have several problems. One of them is getting promotion for what we want to do. I've spoken to the cycling press, and they're interested in supporting fitting that comes from the manufacturing side. Those of us who are freelance, independent, creative, is not what they want to do. And the industry doesn't want us doing this because it means they have to rewrite their manuals if we become popular. There is
which
a
is
cost
which
to
is
our
precisely
success.
why to go to the individual cycling groups in our communities
I've been
and
doing
give
that for the last 30
presentations.
years. But to get ideas beyond our local community to the world at large, it's very hard to get a non-branded bike fit story out there. You will hear them talk about Retool. You will hear them talk about Guru. You won't hear them talk about me. Maybe you'll hear about Chris Balzer, maybe not. But it's everybody using branded product. It's the brand which gets the backing. We as independents, as more creative, as more educated, are not what they're supporting. And I've been told, put together $50,000 in advertising, and you become interesting. It's very hard to be an independent in a world where there's much larger sums than we're used to playing with. When I was working in the hospital and I set up the Fit Lab, I remember the vice president of rehab came down, said, "Congratulations. It looks wonderful what you're doing. I think it's incredibly impressive. But just remember, we can replace you with an MRI machine that runs 24/7, doesn't take benefits, and doesn't take weekends off." And that's what they left me with. And that was repeated multiple times over the 20 years. We are not a profit center for anybody else. And we have to show value to them to stay working with them or to get them to pay attention to us.
Yeah, I think all these points that you're bringing up are awesome. And I would we're getting close to the end of our thing here, but something to ponder is, if we think an association is valuable, how do we make an association or anything around that? The International Bike Fitters Institute, all of those things are great, but how do we fund an association? How does it survive? Other than people volunteering their time. So, this isn't a topic that's going to go away. And I'm sure it's kind of in some way on all of your minds. Will go away, but the topic probably won't. So, anybody else want to jump in here and wrap us up and give us an idea of other things we're missing? Or
I think
there's a few people in the audience. Why don't we just invite them to see for the next 5 or 10 minutes and then wrap it up. Anybody want to, if you want to raise your hand, anybody in the audience have anything to input? Yeah, come on in, unmute and come in. Samsung.
Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. I assume the only person in the group here that is associated with a shop as a fitter. I've talked to a few people, Happy included, and Barnes a few times about the nature of how shops are changing and what they're going to have to do to be able to sustain themselves. And a lot of you brought up points as to why that's going to happen. And it ultimately leads to why service is going to end up saving the brick and mortar stores, because you have companies like Specialized that are going to go direct to consumer. You have Canyon, you have Factor, you have Fazari that's been around even longer. And it behooves a shop to get themselves attached to a fitter, or a fitter to get themselves attached to a shop. And it's going to be a mutually beneficial relationship, because we talk about educating the consumer. Where do most of the consumers go? They go to a shop. And you're not always going to have somebody in the shop that knows how to fit properly. They may very well have a system because they're associated with Specialized, or they have a guru setup, or something along those lines, or somebody who, has a goniometer and a plumb bob, and they can do it to a point. So for me, it's peripheral to what a shop is going to have to do to sustain itself in the future, maybe even coming in the next 5 years, because we've seen a lot of shops, because of the COVID situation, that have either closed up as a result of not leveraging enough on service, because once they sold through all their product, they didn't have enough of a reliable service department to be able to sustain themselves, and they closed up. And now you have the downside of there being a glut of inventory, and they can't make enough sales to cover the cost of the inventory and keep themselves together. So, and then when it comes to an organized group of fitters, I know I would love that, because I've been for outside of YouTube videos and books on applied kinesiology and anatomy, and research and phone calls and meetings with people and conversations until 2 a.m. with a few people in Chicago. It's been mostly self-taught, and I've had to go and find a lot of these things on my own. And fitting, to Tom's point, is the best way to learn and apply these things. But you kind of get lost in the fold, and you feel like you hit plateaus because you don't really know where to go next. So having maybe not like an IBFI level of organization where it becomes like a USAC, or God forbid FIFA, a place like a brain trust almost, where like U6, who've been in this for a very long time, for those of us who are relatively new, to be able to go, okay, here are these landmarks that I've hit, so to speak. Here's where I'm at. Here's the equipment that I use. Here's my approach. Where should I go next? Where are some places that I could go to, either for educational resources, publications, writings, anything, YouTube channels, to be able to go to. So those are some of the things that I've run into and am concerned with, and some of my observations from the industry as a whole and from this conversation. So
Great.
Okay,
Thank
Michael,
you.
we got another. So go ahead, Red Wing Blackbird. Go ahead and unmute and get some thoughts.
I enjoyed listening to all of your ideas. I have a few comments on the focus of an organization that you're speaking about. The most important thing that you guys do is you provide a great rider experience. So how do we get the public to see that? You all talk about the wow moments when someone leaves your fitting studio and can't wait to ride, and they might ride for weeks on end, and that person is changed forever. So how in the world do you get that information to the average rider? Well, you might create video history vignettes. All of you have had at least one bike fit experience where you have changed the life of a rider. Maybe it's a new rider. Those are the most exciting. Maybe it's an older rider who can reestablish the bike riding patterns that they had in the past. And maybe it's an expert, but not always, because the public isn't populated by experts. So they're not the target. They do it because they're trying to get to somewhere, a goal. Everyone else is a goal, but they just want to like it. So senior fitters play a big role in this. The most senior fitters aren't going to be around forever. It's about time that you guys actually interviewed these people. You create short stories of their best experiences. You include videos and possibly the rider that was involved. And then you can post these on the internet. And you can either use a site that you create for the association, or you could even go further and create some kind of catalog of cycling successes. Because that's what really unifies all of you, not how you do this. I mean, I've listened to you guys for some time now. You all do about the same thing. You might start differently, but you end up in the same place. At least you hope you do. And if you don't, well, there it is. You're going to work to improve that. So that's what I have to say about how you might create an association. And there are several places that have done these small associations. I'm personally experienced with those in science. Every sub-area of science has its own association, and it can be very, very narrow, or it can be broadened. Sometimes the associations meet together. And one of the important benefits of an association isn't necessarily to share knowledge, it's to get to know each other. That's what's important. So the fitters need to know each other. They need to know their stories. They need to know why they're fitting, how they got there. And they need to appreciate each other's differences. If you can't do that, you can't have an association. So I think that's all I have to say. I enjoyed your webinar.
Very well put. Thank you. That was awesome. Rick, you want to tell us what's next?
Well, what's next? We'll be going over a little over 2 hours. We're going to be winding up here shortly. The next webinar is scheduled tentatively January 11th. And it's going to basically have more of a medical bike fit theme to it. A lot of questions came up. What's the difference between a bike fit, a medical bike fit, when you get a medical person involved, etc.? What medical person you get involved? The February meeting is going to be February 8th. And we're just kind of setting that up. I think Happy had some ideas about more of a business, bike fitting as a business type of a theme. So we're going to be getting those the next couple coming up. If anybody has any more ideas, we can schedule March, April, May. So Paul and Tom, if you have any ideas, let us know what you would think would work. And with that, any other wrap-ups for anybody here? Greg, final thoughts?
No, I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit. Next one, I'm looking at what's the difference between this type of fitting and that type of fitting. And I think at some point we need to define bike fitting. I always fall back to the MOC came up with years ago. That's kind of what I follow. But to the consumer, a bike fit is I stood over the bike in the shop and said, go ride, all the way past what the six of us may do and getting even in beyond that, what we do in our normal every day. So, what is bike fitting?
Yeah.
That was a consensus paper that we worked on.
Yeah. And I follow that. I consider myself compliant in that is in my fit practice. It's something that I use to guide.
We've been trying to update it, but we don't all agree with enough of it to be able to publish it as a consensus agreement. It's time, and we might want to consider that amongst ourselves to update the consensus agreement, because I think we've become more sophisticated as a community, and our audience is definitely more sophisticated.
Right.
Okay, well, with that, in closing, thank you very much everybody for attending and spending a couple hours with us. I think it was very enlightening. I think there's a lot of good information. And I think based on what a couple of people said, maybe we should take it to the next level and a few of us meet and get to start figuring out how to interview at least some of the older fitters, get some of the experience. Michael, you up for that?
Oh, yeah.
Greg, happy?
I can be
yeah.
interviewed we'll find time.
Fine time. Okay, so yeah, we'll keep everybody up to speed and go from there. And with that, I want to say thank you, everybody, and we'll see you in next month.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Take care.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Take care, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.